And welcome to Whiskey Politics with Dave Sussman. I'm the aforementioned Dave Sussman. Thanks for joining us here at America's Voice Network, currently on Dish and soon other providers. Don't have Dish? You can find our series also at YouTube and our audio podcast series on every podcast app, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. TuneIn is also now playing Whiskey Politics as well, so subscribe over there. And if you're listening on iTunes, please enjoy the show. And also, if you can take a moment and give us a 5-star rating, that also helps us out. You can also find us on the Ricochet Podcast Network. Now, we're coming off a weekend where President Trump left the G7 summit, where trade, tariffs, and tweets took the headlines, which would be nonstop if there wasn't this little summit happening overseas right now with Kim Jong-un. But although the summit is very important, trade with our allies is something that impacts every consumer, no matter how wealthy you are. So to discuss all this, we're pleased to have John Tamny with us. John's the political economy editor at Forbes, editor of RealClearMarkets.com, which is a site that I recommend to all of my clients. Fantastic overview from every perspective, left and right, on the economic situations here in and around the world. He's also a senior fellow in economics at Reason Foundation, and his articles can be seen in the Wall Street Journal, Investors Business Daily, Financial Times, National Review, and the London's Daily Telegraph. And he's also a weekly guest on Forbes on Fox. John is also an author of some great books on the economy and the Fed. His third book, The End of Work, just came out, which chronicles some fascinating predictions about the future of work and how jobs of today and tomorrow increasingly don't feel like work. So pour yourself your favorite beverage, sit back, and listen to the Whiskey Politics interview with John Tamny. Welcome, John. How are you today?
Hey, Dave. Great. Thank you so much for having me on.
I know we had a little bit of a scheduling glitch last week and had to postpone, but it actually turns out that was of benefit to us because since then, we've had the G7 conference in Quebec, just happened, and the ensuing diplomatic mess. I know you're a big proponent of free trade. Tell us what happened in Canada and what's going on.
Well, what happened in Canada is that Donald Trump, while maybe presumably a great businessman, does not understand or chooses to pretend that he doesn't understand that trade always balances. I run, quote, trade surpluses with my employers, and my rewards are trade deficits. I run them with my favorite restaurants, my favorite clothiers, my favorite, my landlord, you name it. And so when the world is serving our needs, that's the sign that we're thriving. The fact that the whole world lines up and directs the majority of its goods and services to the United States is the surest sign of America's ongoing economic greatness. Donald Trump views the latter as evidence that the world's taking advantage of us. No, it's when people aren't competing to serve our needs that we're being taken advantage of, simply because there's no competition for our dollars.
Doesn't Trump want the elimination of trade barriers and tariffs?
It's hard to say. Some people justify his tweeting and his trade brinksmanship as evidence that he just wants to bring global barriers down. And even if so, what a waste of time. To produce is to express a desire to import. It could be from across the street, it could be from the other side of the world, but that's why we produce. The Chinese aren't producing feverishly to meet our needs because they want to be poor. They're doing so because they want what we have. And so ultimately they're going to bring down their tariffs on their own simply because they want to live like we do. And so what's ideal for the individual is ideal for a country. As individuals, are we better off when the whole world is meeting our needs without tariffs? Yes, when you have everyone in the world competing to serve you, your paycheck stretches farther. After that, are we advantaged as individuals by dividing up work with the rest of the world? Unquestionably. When we can divide up work with the rest of the world, it frees us up to do the work that most amplifies our talents. And so the simple answer here is it doesn't matter what other countries do. The U.S. wins always and has the best trade deals always when it has no trade deals, when it says the U.S. is an open market to the world's plenty. We want to trade with you. We want to divide up work with you. After that, the world will compete to be like us simply because the richest countries are open to the world's plenty. That Trump doesn't need to do anything here, and that's what's dangerous.
Let's do a little Econ 101 right here. I mean, from a perspective of free markets, we take a look at tariffs, and if tariffs are being put on American goods, and we see some dairy goods that are 200, 300%, or whatever the numbers are, going into Canada, does that not create a problem for American exporters? Competition, for example. It's going to cost less for Canadians to buy other products.
Yeah, in a sense, but who does it really damage? It damages the Canadians because their people are suddenly paying a lot more for something that they could get for much less. It damages the Canadian economy and every Canadian worker simply because a tariff like that on U.S. dairy means that Canadians have to duplicate a process that could be done for them in the United States. And so no doubt there are going to be, in theory, a few U.S. producers damaged by the tariffs, but that doesn't excuse us damaging 330 million Americans by raising tariffs on Canadian goods. The country most open to the world's plenty is always and everywhere the winner, no matter what. And so if the Canadians or the Chinese want to harm their citizens by taxing the inflow of goods, let them. Let that mistake be theirs. Let's not mimic it.
So increasing trade barriers, you think, doesn't impact small businesses or the economy in the United States then?
In other countries?
Well, no, I'm talking about American producers, American manufacturers. And I'm not talking about services because I want to get to that in just a minute. There's a difference there, right? I think we are, for example, we're a net importer of goods from Canada, but I think we are a slight exporter when we include services. Right? So there's a lot of gray areas here in some of the numbers that are being thrown around by the administration and also the media. But just generally speaking, if it cost a Canadian more to buy my product that I create in the United States as opposed to somebody in Canada who's producing the same product, isn't that intrinsically unfair to the American producer?
Yes, but so what? I guess is my answer. Based on that, Hong Kong's got the most unfair trading relationships in the world because it imposes no barriers on foreign goods or tariffs on foreign goods. But clearly much that's produced in Hong Kong is going to be tariffed in other countries. Are the Hong Kongers poor as a result? No, they're incredibly rich because ultimately the richest, most advanced country is the one that's most open to foreign goods. I don't think it's the federal government's job to work out trade deals with other countries. And so while it might be great for certain small businesses in the U.S. To have lower tariffs in Canada, there's nothing in the Constitution that says anything about free trade. Or better yet, there's nothing in the Constitution that says anything about economic growth. All the Constitution says that is we as individuals are free people. And so we as individuals should be free to trade with whomever we want around the world. If the rest of the world wants to injure its citizens, that's fine. Too bad for them. But it's not the president's job to intervene in what other countries do in that way, I don't think. And so, yeah, sure. I suppose it's harmful, but it's much more harmful when our government gets involved in what should be private transactions.
Yeah, and I think we're focused here on dairy when it comes to Canada, but apparently the biggest category of goods exported from the United States was vehicles, followed by machinery and minerals and fuels and plastics. So those are the products we mostly import from Canada too. So again, I know we're getting into the weeds on this Canadian situation because of what happened over the weekend, and Trudeau came out and said some things that didn't please the White House. They responded in kind. But I mean, isn't it, I guess, you come from a more of a libertarian standpoint. I guess it's really more laissez-faire, isn't it? That just open, free borders allow, more people to win.
Yeah, let's stress again, why is free trade, why is openness to foreign plenty good? Well, it's good because it's good for the individual. The individual is much better off, and that's all an economy is when you have not just the people in your country, but the whole world competing to serve your needs. But it's even better for the individual in the open country simply because when you're dividing up work with the rest of the world, you have much better odds of doing that, which uniquely elevates your skills. Division of labor is not giving up of work. It's not about job loss. It's just about doing jobs that are most associated with what you're good at. And so it always works to be open to foreign plenty. And ultimately, it redounds to businesses large and small in the U.S. And the reason for this is basic. If we put up tariffs to foreign goods and make it harder for foreigners to sell here, by definition, we're going to make it harder for U.S. businesses to sell overseas. And so no matter what foreign countries are doing, we should remain open to foreign plenty, because if they can sell to us, we have greater odds of selling to them.
How much do you think of what just took place over the weekend was political? I mean, you had Larry Kudlow, the National Economic Council director, and also contributor over at Ricochet, where we're heard. He came out and he said that, President Trump, POTUS, isn't going to let the Canadian Prime Minister push him around. How much of that do you think is with the summit, with Kim Jong-un coming up, purely political?
I mean, if you have to pose or make political statements ahead of some person of no consequence like Kim Jong-un, I really feel sorry for you. If we've reached the point that the President of the United States is positioning himself ahead of a ruler of a country that has an economy the size of Fairfax, Virginia, we have got much bigger problems than an alleged trade dispute. So I consider Larry a good friend, but Larry, if you're watching on this one, you're wrong. I realize you've got a job to do, but the simple truth is open countries always benefit the most. You know this, and you know this well. Markets were never afraid when Donald Trump wasn't talking about trade, when there was all this talk about Chinese theft of intellectual property, all this nonsensical talk about the Chinese. Markets were never afraid of that. Once they only started to sell off once Donald Trump started threatening tariffs. And that's a reminder that investors are fully okay with the status quo as is. What they don't want is a trade war. And so for Larry or anyone to pretend that we're better off by Trump's brinkmanship when he's talking about something he clearly doesn't know about, global trade, I don't think that's a serious response. Presidents do best when they do nothing. The U.S. is the richest country in the world precisely because we have a 1.4% average tariff on foreign goods. We're basically Hong Kong as is. Why would you weaken us by mimicking other countries that are poorer than we are, that put up much higher barriers to U.S. goods?
I agree. I mean, I think that and I'm wondering whether or not, and I think a lot of people have referred to this, the metaphor, the fourth dimensional chess and all of these different things. How much of all of this are just gambits, pantomimes to get what he wants? And ultimately his goal, as we started out talking about, is to remove all tariffs and barriers for trade. I'm getting mixed messages.
Yeah, I think it's hard to imagine that that's Trump's ultimate view. When you can go back to the 1980s, he's always believed that we were being damaged by the inflow of foreign goods. So to pretend that he's actually, in fact, Frederick Bastiat in Peter Navarro clothing, I think is quite the reach. And the simple truth, once again, is that the best trade deal is the one that opens your country up the most to foreign plenty. You benefit from the world competing to serve your needs, and you benefit from the division of labor that always and everywhere elevates the individual, much as openness to foreign goods do. So even if Trump is negotiating, what's he getting? We're already the winner. We've gotten 1.4% average tariff. All these trade deals do is reduce foreign barriers simply because the U.S. is already basically Hong Kong. How could Trump improve on what is brilliant unless his plan is, we're at 1.4%, I want to be at 0, and I don't care what other countries are going to do. We're going to do it because it helps the people the most. Unless he's talking that, there's nothing to be impressed with by this ridiculous brinksmanship.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, you just mentioned Peter Navarro, the trade advisor, and he referred to some statistics last week that actually surprised me, which was that 3/4 of U.S. GDP is a function of the service sector. In other words, we only make 25% on products, right? So That was astounding to me. I knew the numbers were high, but I didn't think it was three quarters.
It's beautiful. Thank goodness. Yeah, we don't make a lot. Isn't it interesting? Okay, because you're out in California. Texas, producers in the state of Texas export, quote, more technology than they do in California.
Right.
Okay, that's a misleading number. In California, there's very little manufacture anymore. That's a sign of its prosperity. In California, they do the high value work of designing things, and then they let other less evolved places produce things. Because guess what California produces more of than anyone in technology in particular is shares of the most valuable, looked up to companies in the world. Of course, the export of those shares doesn't count in the quote trade balance, something that we shouldn't even measure in the first place.
Right, it's
but
intangible. Yeah.
California's prosperity guaranteed. San Francisco, Beverly Hills, Palo Alto, New York City, Palm Beach have the highest quote trade deficits in the world. And why is that? Because they're the richest, full of the most talented people on earth who don't waste their time manufacturing stuff. They get rich creating the things and leaving that low value work to others.
Interesting. Last question for you on this subject, because I really want to get into your book. I find it fascinating. But real quickly, and we're talking about Trump, 18 months into his presidency. Where are you? Where do you stand on things right now, as a grade, as a report card?
Despite all of my complaining, I'm going to give him a B minus. I'm not a fan of the protectionist talk. The anti-dollar talk horrifies me. But I judge presidents on how little they accomplish. And I don't think Trump's accomplished very much. I mean, there's talk, look, the tax cut is so overdone. It's not that big of a tax cut in the first place, and it's really bad because it's hitting talented people on each coast really hard. So I think Republicans vastly overstate the tax cut. But other than that, Trump, precisely because he's so volatile, isn't getting a whole lot done. And if you throw in what he is doing, I've heard the judicial appointments are good. Okay, he's outsourced that to others, thank goodness. He seems to be a fairly fierce deregulator. Okay, thumbs up to that. But Trump ultimately is going to be a non-legislative president simply because he doesn't work well with Washington. And that's the kind of president I want. It's the ones who promise to get a lot done that terrify me. So at least for now, we've got to give him some credit for not being nearly as awful as the markets thought.
Let me ask you, the economic indicators are obviously all positive. You've got the lowest unemployment across all minority and ethnic backgrounds. You've got record-breaking people in the workforce. You've got more jobs available than there are people looking. What are those all due to? Is it a Trump economy?
Well, in fairness, to some degree it is. Now, in fairness, let's remember that stock markets were rallying right up to the election. And they're rallying on the assumption that it's going to be Hillary Clinton. And so to some degree, the economy was already improving. We can't get around that truth. This was happening beforehand. The deregulation can't have hurt, and so Trump should be given credit for that. It's probably aided optimism. I say the tax cuts are vastly overrated. They weren't nearly big enough, but I suppose it speaks to a proper bent on the part of the president. So I think a lot of this I tend to side with those people who say that Obama handed him something okay. Not that Obama was anything special, but luckily for Obama, there was gridlock from 2010 on. And so with that, if you show me a period of gridlock, I'll show you a pretty good economy. And so I wasn't a fan of Obama. Certainly wasn't a fan of George W. Bush. I'm not a fan of Trump. I'm a libertarian. But I think overall, because there's basically gridlock in Washington, the economy is always good during periods like this. What does have me worried is look at the price of oil. During periods when oil is up, that's a sign of a weak dollar. Oil boomed under Jimmy Carter, boomed under Richard Nixon, boomed under George W. Bush, 3 failed economic presidents. Oil collapsed under Ronald Reagan. Oil collapsed under Bill Clinton. We did not have an energy industry under Bill Clinton and Ronald Reagan. They were both strong dollar presidents. The economy boomed under them. And not surprising, oil is something, while important to the economy, essential to the economy, it's something that the most backward nations on earth, places like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Equatorial Guinea, Venezuela, Russia, can provide us ably. People get all excited about the fracking boom. They say this is a sign of a vibrant economy. I say it's a sign of an economy that's performing suboptimally. I like the 1990s when the U.S. energy industry was non-existent and we were paying $12 for a barrel of oil. Now we're paying $65, $70. That's a sign of a U.S. economy that's performing well below its potential. Yet Trump...
Yeah, but how much of that is geopolitical? I mean, you got Iran now that's more or less marginalized on the oil markets, and Saudi Arabia, is trying to produce more. But you have a new market in America, in North America, especially with Canada, as you were just talking about with the shale. So, how much of that is just shifting sands, for lack of a better term, when it comes to energy changing?
I don't think it's geopolitical at all.
No? Okay.
And because look back to the 80s and 90s when the dollar was strong, the oil that's priced in dollars was quite a bit cheaper. We cheapened the dollar a great deal in the 21st century, and much like the 1970s, we had a repeat of the 1970s. Suddenly the U.S. energy industry was strong. It's not as though OPEC was greedy in the 1970s, then very generous in the 80s and 90s, only to become greedy again in the 21st century. OPEC doesn't control the value of oil. The biggest driver of the value of oil is the value of the dollar in which it's priced. And so we cheapened the dollar under Bush and Obama, and unsurprisingly, there was an oil boom. Texas boomed while the rest of the U.S. economy struggled. And so I don't think it's geopolitical at all. I think it has everything to do with dollar policy here. And if you look throughout history, during periods in which the U.S. energy industry booms in the United States, it's usually a sign that the rest of the economy is weakening, simply because we're doing something that some of the most backward places on earth can do for us. To then mimic what they can do is a sign of us moving backwards, moving away from the knowledge economy in Texas, in California, the technological economy, and doing what, again, the rest of the world can do for us.
Last question on this, and I promised you that before, but I think this is a fascinating subject. You're seeing incremental CPI going up. There's threats of interest rate increases. Obviously, you've always got the black swan event that nobody knows or could predict that could happen anytime soon. How do you feel about the economy in the next couple of years? What does it look like to you?
Again, I think the economy will be fine the less that Donald Trump does. I'm one of these people who says that even if Republicans lose Congress in the upcoming elections, that won't be a bad thing. I like gridlock. I don't like either political party to be powerful. If we can see that scenario, I'd be fairly optimistic. I'd be even more optimistic. One of the things that the lone email that I sent to Larry Kudlow once he was appointed NEC head is I said, remember what you wrote in American Abundance, that a strong dollar is essential to economic growth. Kudlow in his book was describing the Clinton economy. And I said, if presidents get the dollar they want, Larry knows that. I said, if Donald Trump moves in the direction of the weak dollar, he will fail. You know it, I know it. And so if we can avoid the dollar cheapening brinksmanship that we saw from George W. Bush, we saw to some degree from Obama, we saw from Jimmy Carter and Nixon, Trump's going to have a successful presidency. But that's the one thing that scares me along with trade.
Yeah. Interesting. Let's move over because you've got a fascinating new book here, The End of Work, which a lot of people on the left will be very happy to hear. No more work? I'm kidding. No, you talk about passion for work. And this is something that I've got an almost 18-year-old son. We're looking at colleges right now, and he wants to go into a certain industry, journalism, broadcasting, sports, and things like this. And I've always said to him, I want, no matter what it is that you do, no matter how much money you make, I want you to have passion, because then it doesn't feel like work. And you will be very, very good at it if you have that passion. Talk about this book, and I want to get into a lot of different details within it here, but tell me a little bit about how this book came about and really what the premise is for you.
Well, how the book came about is my wife and I were invited to a Fleetwood Mac concert in 2014, Washington, D.C. I don't know music very
I saw
well.
that tour. Christy McVie?
Oh, you did? Okay,
Yeah.
so you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And we accepted. We thought, okay, they could retire. So this may be their last tour. So let's go to it and everything. And so they weren't good seats. They're kind of the back of the arena, but that is the basis of the story. We watched the concert on the video screen.
Right.
And you know this because you saw it. Mick Fleetwood in concert literally abuses his drum kit.
Yeah.
The joy in his eyes is it's so uplifting. And Lindsey Buckingham, I had no idea.
He knocked it out the park. 70 years old. Where did he get his energy from?
Thank you. Thank you. But you're hitting on the crucial point, is the happiness in his eyes as he played the guitar and sang. I thought, this is so. And it was a revelation for me. These guys aren't retiring anytime soon. Hard as they're working, they're hardly working because they love what they do endlessly. And I thought, there's a story here. Lindsey Buckingham on stage can fill an arena. If Lindsey Buckingham tried to do investment banking, which you do, if he tried to talk policy with us, he would probably cause the room to empty. But when he does what he's an expert in, he's brilliant. And so I thought, there's a story here. More and more people in the U.S. get up each day and do what they're uncontrollably in love with for a job. This is such a modern concept. 150 years ago, you had 50-50 odds of working on a farm no matter what, whereas today you don't have to. And I thought, we've got to start talking about how work is evolving, and that for the first time, it's really true that people can do what they want for a job, something that they're excited about every day. And so I wrote a book about it.
How does this impact? Because so I'm kind of the older end of Gen X, right? And so we were raised by our baby boomer parents, who basically says you need to study a profession. You need to be an accountant, a lawyer, a doctor, something along those lines, and you will always have that to fall back on. And I know many people in my age, the late 40s, early 50s, even to their 60s, who've done a job for 40 years to collect that gold watch at the end of retirement and have been miserable. What are we seeing right now as far as the difference goes with the millennials and even the younger generation, Gen Z? I don't even know what they're called anymore. Gen I? Anyway, whoever's following the millennials, where are they coming into this with a different perspective than we did?
I think they are, but I think some of them are coming into it with our perspective. You and I have a very 20th century perspective on work. And to be fair, we, with good reason, had this 20th century perspective. It used to not be that you could turn your passion into a job. When you and I are both Generation X, if you and I had told our friends in the 80s and 90s, yeah, I'm going to become a cook or a chef, they would have looked at us uncomfortably.
Right.
They would have said, ooh, what happened? Because that's exactly what happened to Danny Meyer. Here's this guy, went to Trinity College, was making very good money as a salesman in New York, was about to go to law school, and then he takes a massive pay cut to get into restaurants. And his friends looked at him like, what happened to you? That's the way things used to be. In a smaller economy, people weren't dining out all the time. They weren't outsourcing their food needs to cooks of all stripes. And so if you got into restaurants, that meant you had failed. Well, fast forward to the present, restaurants are increasingly another option to becoming a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or an investment banker. People who get into restaurants are taking a very normal path nowadays. It's the path to celebrityhood. People can make a life out of their love of food. When you and I were young, we didn't really have that option as much. It was a very risky bet. Nowadays, it isn't.
You talk about how there's just massive numbers of options that exist today that didn't exist when we were growing up. And looking through your book here, you talk about how even actors now have more options because of the myriad of different streaming platforms. And you're no longer relying upon getting on the Rockford Files or the Brady Bunch, but you can be on 1,000 different streaming networks. Or you even refer to different professions that didn't exist. I was stunned to see that there are actually people out there paid to coach you on how to play video games.
Yeah, well, isn't it amazing? Thanks once again to this massive rise in prosperity over the last 30 years, watching video game players is one of the biggest spectator sports on earth. And so as a result, there are video game players who earn in the millions, and there are now video game coaches. And let's think back again to when you and I were growing up. That's when video games sort of started to catch flight. If we had told people, yeah, I'm going to play video games for a living, people would have laughed at us and said, oh, what an idiot. And then if we'd said, no, I'm going to become a video game coach, they would have had us committed.
Right.
But that's increasingly...
This is a thing now.
It's a thing, and it's all based on prosperity. As the economy grows, the ways in which people can earn a living explodes with it. And so acting is a good example. When you and I were growing up, if you got on a network, wow, hey, that was really your only option.
Right.
Watch anyone who questions this should just watch the next Emmy Awards. Look at where the nominees come from. They come usually not from network shows. They don't even come from cable TV anymore. Increasingly, it's nominees from an Amazon Studios show or Netflix or Hulu show. And so the range of television shows being made today has exploded. And so, whereas when you and I were growing up, if we'd said, yeah, we want to be an actor, once again, people would have said, oh, yeah, good luck with that. And so what are you going to do when you grow up? Nowadays, it's a very serious option, thanks again to this prosperity that expands the ways in which people can do what they love and thus allowing more and more people to specialize.
You point to how, when we grew up, it was all about our diploma, right? You try to get into the best school that you could possibly get into, and then you could showcase that diploma, and that's how you get the doors open to you. Nowadays, you have to showcase yourself. Showcase your own talent, brand yourself, for lack of a better term. Talk about how that's evolved as well, because, I've got this little show right here. This is not what I do for a living, until I can, I guess. But is this, this type of specialization, if you will, kind of the future, how people will just do what it is that they want to do, and that could create their wealth?
Oh, without question. Look at all the people who are getting rich off of featuring their genius on the internet in this way. My wife alerted me to all the people she watches on YouTube who put on makeup every day for them. And in teaching people how to put makeup up on YouTube, they're literally flown around the world by the top makeup companies because these people who just do it on YouTube every day are providing a service, an advertisement for makeup companies that they could never get from traditional ads. And so these influencers are very valuable. People who feature their shopping on Twitter and on Instagram increasingly are paid enormous sums of money as influencers. Imagine that. You're passionate shopping, you're going to make a career out of it. And it speaks to the broader point about education. Look, education was always overrated. I'm not against college for a second. There's lots of reasons to go to college, but for anyone to ever presume that it had anything to do with preparing you for the working world was laughable. If professors knew what the working world was going to be about, they wouldn't be professors. It's especially not important right now, precisely because of technology's rapid change, rapid impact on the economy, this dynamic, constant change in the nature of work. I mean, again, who could have predicted video game coaches even 2 years ago? What could college possibly teach us about how to thrive in the working world? What's going to matter in the working world is not where you went to college. For some people, it'll help. It'll get you indoors. Nothing wrong with that. But what's going to matter is one's ability to find a passion and then monetize it. Because guaranteed, if you have a passion today, there is a job related to it. But school's not going to change that. School is just going to be something we do. And I think more and more people will do it. But let's not pretend that school is going to make you successful, and thank goodness for that. You and I think I speak for the both of us in saying we would look askance at someone who says to a woman, "Oh, you can't make it because you're a woman," or "Hey, you can't make it in this field because you're the wrong color."
Absolutely.
What could be more wrong than to say to someone, and cruel to say, "Oh, you didn't go to college, so you can't make it in this industry"? We should hate that every bit as much. I just think not going to college is another choice. As long as you find your passion, you're going to be fine.
You have something called Tamny's Law, jobs don't feel like work. You point to how affluence makes jobs not feel like work. Explain that. I mean, as a society and as a culture, we're obviously more affluent now than ever, right?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that there's this assumption out there that rich societies become lazy. Oh, that's ridiculous. That's totally backwards. Americans work more than ever. Every statistic shows that Americans can't get enough of their jobs. They never take all the vacation, a lot of them. And it's not fear of losing a job. Americans increasingly can't get enough of their work. And so all Tamny's Law is saying is that as prosperity grows, more and more people escape laziness simply because they're able to do work that doesn't feel like work. They get up every day and they get to be in their own small way Lindsey Buckingham. Miss work, retire. Work is where I get to showcase my genius. There's no way I'm missing work, and we see it's such a happy thing. I've got an op-ed coming out this week that kind of goes along these lines. Think back to when Peyton Manning retired. The devastation. You think he wanted to quit his job? Something that elevated. He was bawling.
Yeah.
Tiger Woods has had an agonizing 3 years. You think the greatest golfer on earth wanted to quit this? And it speaks to the triumph of affluence. Nowadays, we can do what we love for work. And so as the economy grows, more and more people will get to specialize, get to do what narrowly elevates what's unique about them. More and more, your kids, your grandkids, their interest in retirement is going to plummet because why would they want to quit doing what makes them feel special?
So you think some of the biggest issues that we may be facing for people that are not working, maybe unemployment or just in low-end career service job sectors, is that they're uninspired?
Yeah, I don't buy for a second that anyone lacks work ethic. I don't buy that anyone lacks intelligence. Mm-hmm. But I think the economies of the past suffocated a lot of work ethic and intelligence. Again, I don't presume to speak for you, so I'll speak for myself. If my only option had been farm work, I would have been unintelligent and I would have been an object of pity. Fast forward to the present, thanks to endless job destruction, automation destroying all manner of forms of work, it didn't put us in breadlines. It just enabled us to showcase our talents in myriad ways. LeBron James on the basketball court has a level of intelligence that would reduce Warren Buffett, if he chose to talk with him about it, to a blithering idiot. Warren Buffett, if he presumed to talk about music with Lindsey Buckingham, would be a complete fool around Lindsey Buckingham. Buckingham's knowledge, his ability to pick up an instrument and play it so beautifully, or Paul McCartney, would make Buffett look stupid. Okay, but these guys couldn't talk investing with Buffett. Think about what this means. 150 years ago, most of them wouldn't have been able to showcase these skills, and Buffett's in fact talked about it. What if sports were the only avenue to achievement in the economy? If that were true, Buffett fails. But in a growing economy, there are more and more avenues to achievement. So people with unique skills and, yes, intelligence finally get to showcase them. So the more affluence we have, the less lazy people get because they can finally do what they love in return for remuneration.
Last subject for you, and I have so many more questions. I could talk with you for hours on all this stuff, but in your book, restaurants were a very big part of your story. And, you know, we're seeing right now that McDonald's is automating with robots. All of the fast food restaurants are eventually going to go that way. $15 minimum wages. It's just economically not feasible for many of these, especially small and franchisees of these restaurants. They just can't pay college kids this level of work. Are you looking at Are you looking at this as an opportunity? Because people, like in the 1980s, I had 20, 30 jobs. I had to pay my way through school. I had to buy my first crappy car because of all those small menial jobs. Many of our kids aren't doing that now. Is that a positive or a negative over, talking about how to find your passion? Don't they have to have that work ethic to start with?
Great question. I would first say I think work ethic is easily found. It's just a function of finding what interests you, and then the work ethic comes with it because you're getting to do something that reinforces your skills. As far as fast food and everything, I'm not worried about that. Let me be clear. I think the minimum wage is abomination. The minimum wage should be less than zero. I should be able to pay Jeff Bezos so that I can work for him and learn from him. At the same time, I don't think that's why restaurants are automating. They're automating because low-paid workers are the most expensive workers of all. And they are because the turnover with them is so high.
It's the training costs. Yeah.
Yeah, the training costs, and then because they're not as invested in the job, and because they're not invested in the job, they don't learn the customers, they don't learn their orders and everything. Look, if the minimum wage were zero, restaurants would have even a bigger incentive to automate simply because these are the jobs that people don't want to do. I do not think this is going to put young people out of work. What I think is going to happen is that these robots are going to redefine entry-level work such that even young people will get to do work that they love at a much younger age that kind of elevates what's unique about them. It's not going to put people out of work on any level. It's just going to make people fall in love with work. And I think what you have to realize when you think about what you did to pay your bills and everything, yeah, the economy wasn't as evolved back then. And so we look at young kids and we think, look at how good they have it. Oh, wow, they're lazy. They don't want to work as much as we do. But guaranteed, that's what they said about people in your generation. You and I know this because they made movies about us. Slackers, Reality Bites. There's a book, Generation X. Yeah, we were lazy and everything. Well, guess what? You can go back to the 19th century, and they were saying the same thing about young kids then, too, that they were lazy, that they were saying things like, it's not in my job description, so I'm not going to do it. And if anyone who doubts this, pull up online A Message to Garcia. It's written by a businessman about young people in the late 19th century. He said the same things about them then that people say about young kids now. You know what it is? It's called economic progress. Young kids don't have the worries today that we had, that our parents had, that our parents' parents have. That is called beautiful economic progress. But don't worry about your kids being able to find their passion. Guaranteed they will, and they will because in an evolved economy, their odds of doing so are much better. If you can't find it now, it's because you choose not to.
You sound very optimistic, and I feel even more optimistic speaking with you and watching you on Forbes and reading you everywhere else. Folks, where can folks find you and your book?
Well, you can buy lots of copies of my book on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com, plus bookstores. And then I usually put out 3 op-eds per week on Forbes, but also Real Clear Markets. You can find everything there. I put everything because I edit Real Clear Markets, and so you can find me. The future of work is amazing. This book is for kids who are worried about the future. If you can find a passion, there's a job related to it, and it's a remunerative job, but it's also for parents. Parents need to realize that they're looking at work from a 20th century perspective. In the 21st, if your kids find something they're interested in, there's a job. So it's hopefully a way to soften the fears of parents that their kids aren't focused. All they need to do is find what they love.
It's a philosophy that I've taken to heart, and I think we're on the same wavelength here because I'm not pushing my son into going into one of the disciplines that I know he's going to hate. I want him to have passion for it, and he might have to starve for 10 years, but you know what? If he loves what he does, he's going to be successful. And we're looking forward to meeting with Steve Forbes, by the way, next month at Freedom Fest. It will be the 3rd time we sit down with him for an interview. So Forbes is great, and we love it as an outlet. So John Tamny, thank you so much for spending the time with us. And folks, you can find the link to The End of Work below this interview as you hear it here today. And John, thanks again for joining us. And folks, you can continue finding us on YouTube, on Ricochet, and don't forget to watch us on America's Voice Network on Dish. Hopefully soon on more providers, including DirecTV and Comcast. See you all again real soon at Whiskey Politics.